welcome to the AP World History Podcast. This is episode 4, Emerging Belief Systems. Since the earliest times, people have wanted answers to questions that we really can't answer. Why am I here? Who made me? What happens after I die? And religions developed around the world to try to answer some of these questions. In the earliest civilizations, religions were polytheistic, and the word polytheistic means that they believed in many gods. And gods and goddesses were typically associated with nature, and people made sacrifices to these gods to ensure things such as good rain, good harvests, and so on. Around the year 500 BCE, new major religions and philosophies emerged to address some new questions or concerns that the old belief systems may not have been able to answer. And many of these religions still have a major impact on the world today. In China, we'll look at the rise of Daoism and Confucianism. In India, Hinduism and Buddhism. In Persia, Zoroastrianism. In the Middle East, Judaism and Christianity. And finally in Greece, a more secular philosophy of reason and logic. Now in China and Greece, the new belief systems focused mainly on affairs of this world and were more practical. In India, Persia, and the Middle East, the new religions focused primarily on the realm of the divine and were more spiritual. So it's interesting to note that all of the world's major current religions, with the notable exception of Islam, developed around roughly the same time. And we don't know exactly why this is, but there are some theories, and most of the theories surround some major social change to go out and seek some religious enlightenment. The discovery of iron led to new weapons that were more dangerous than the previous bronze weapons, and wars broke out on scales that had never been seen before. Cities grew larger than ever before, and often these cities grew because of trade and because of increased migrations. So there was a lot more contact, direct contact between people who had radically different views of the world and radically different views of the afterlife. And historians argue that all of these things could have potentially led thinkers to begin to question their old belief systems and to seek out some new answers. Last week we looked at the Zhao overthrow of the Shang dynasty and the concept of the mandate of heaven. The mandate of heaven basically meant that a ruler had the mandate to rule as long as he ruled justly and in the best interest of his people. If a ruler became corrupt, then he would be overthrown. The belief in China was that the normal and appropriate order of things was unification under one ruler, and this ruler ruled by the mandate of heaven. Now, the Zhao took over in 1122 BCE. By 800 BCE, the power of the Zhao was disappearing, and by 500 BCE, the political unity of China was long gone. Okay, so China became fragmented, with many local leaders all trying to fight for power and fight for resources. And this time of great chaos is known as the Warring States period. And it's during these centuries, which seem to have been really horrific, just war all the time on a scale that had never been seen before, that the great Chinese philosophers spent a great deal of time thinking about how to restore order in China. One answer to the problem was an iron-fisted philosophy known as legalism. Han Fei Su was the main thinker. Essentially, legalism believed that the solution to China's problems lay in harsh rules and laws. It took a pessimistic view of human nature. Legalism contends that regular people are stupid and can't plan for anything more than just the immediate future. The state, on the other hand, was the only institution that could act with people's long-term best interests in mind. Legalism attacked what it viewed as non-essential occupations. The only jobs that mattered were farmers and soldiers, so if you were a merchant, a craftsman, and especially a scholar, you were regarded as being useless to society. And by 221 BCE, China was brought under the control of the Qin dynasty, and Emperor Qin was a brutal dictator who ruled with an iron fist. The Qin dynasty lasted only for 15 years, but it brought together China under the control of one ruler. But the brutality of the Qin regime basically meant that no other following dynasties could at least publicly support the ideas of legalism. The man depicted here is Confucius. He was born in 551 BCE to a family of aristocrats. Confucius was a philosopher who thought about ways to help China out of the Warring States period. He was also a teacher. Confucius' theory was in contrast to legalism. Laws and punishments were not the answer. Instead, Confucius believed that social harmony would come if superiors exemplified moral and ethical behavior. Confucius' theory resides in the idea of unequal relationships, where one member is superior to the other. So, the husband is superior to the wife, the father is superior to the son, the older brother is superior to his younger brother, and finally, the ruler is superior to his subject. Now, if the superior acted in the best interest of their inferior subject, was benevolent and had a genuine concern for them, then the inferior would be obedient and admire the superior. And in Confucianism, this idea of benevolence and goodness and nobility, ethical living, was described by the word ren. Confucius grew up in the same Warring States period as the legalists, but he didn't believe that people were by nature evil. People were capable of being moral and selfless, and the key to this was education. So it's not surprising that Confucius was a teacher. And Confucius prescribed a broad education for everybody, emphasizing literature, language, history, philosophy, and ethics. And following the brief but brutal rule of the Qin dynasty, the door was left open for Confucian ideas to take hold, and Confucianism was adopted as the official ideology of the Chinese state. As China's bureaucracy took shape during the Han dynasty, an examination system was put in place to determine who got the best jobs, who got the best government jobs. So administrative positions were not hereditary, they were based on exam performance. And students studied their whole lives for the examinations. And in the examinations, students were given real-world situations and asked to apply the principles of Confucius to these situations. So there's a little bit of democracy, and those who were given positions where they could rule, it was deemed based on outstanding moral character and intellectual achievement, not just somebody that was born into it. With that said, typically it was only young males from well-off families who could afford to study and have tutors to prepare for the exams. But there was some degree of social mobility, and it was common for a village to sponsor a particularly bright young child to go through the examination process. So what did Confucianism mean for Chinese society? On one hand, the belief system justified gender and class inequality with the idea of unequal relationships. On the other hand, Confucius placed heavy demands on rulers. Rulers were responsible for acting in the best interests of their subjects, and that involved keeping taxes low, being just, and providing for all the material needs of the people. Lastly, Confucianism was not a particularly spiritual belief system, and it helped shape the secular, non-religious nature of China. So Confucius never denied the existence of God and spirits, but his concerns were primarily based on real-world issues, such as human relationships, effective government, and social harmony. And of spirits and God and death, Confucius said that we don't even understand the world that we live in today, so how could we possibly understand what happens after we die? Confucian ideas didn't become mainstream in China until much after his death, but as Confucian ideas gained in popularity, another school of thought arose to challenge these ideas. Lao Tzu lived in the 6th century BCE, around the same time as Confucius, and his position was an archivist, or record keeper. And Lao Tzu published an important work known as the Tao Te Ching, meaning the way and its power. And legend has it that Lao Tzu published this book, and then he rode off into the wilderness of western China on the back of a water buffalo. The reality is that there's actually some historical debate over whether Lao Tzu was an actual person or just a composite creation of a number of different Chinese thinkers at the time. Nevertheless, these ideas sparked a movement known as Daoism. So, while Confucius focused on developing and fostering human relationships and education, Lao Tzu advocated withdrawing from the chaos of Chinese politics in the Warring States period, doing away with education, and becoming one with nature. The principle of Taoism is Tao, which is a force that governs all natural phenomenon. So it's not a human-like God. It's more of an abstract concept. Nature will follow a path no matter what. So you're much better off becoming part of nature and becoming part of nature's path. So Taoism advocated a modest life, living in simple, small, self-sufficient communities. So while Confucianism advocated fostering relationships, becoming moral through education, and a rigid hierarchy, Taoism argued to give up that education, retreat from the world of politics, become one with nature, and essentially go with the flow. Now, although Confucianism and Taoism conflicted sharply with each other, a lot of Chinese people viewed the two concepts as complementary. The concept of the yin and the yang, a belief in the unity of opposites, was part of Chinese culture by this time. So, a scholar might occupy themselves with a Confucian project of government by goodness during the day, and then go home and do some Taoist things like breathing exercises and meditation.